Han Ji-sung's life had been written before he could hold a pen. As the first grandson of the Han Group's founding chairman, he had spent 33 years preparing for one thing: succession, business school, silent loyalty, steady climbs through the ranks while others fought for attention. Now, seated across from his dying grandfather, Ji-sung expected the final confirmation. Instead, Chairman Han slid a folder across the table. The board needs reassurance, family, continuity. Ji-sung opened the folder. A photograph, a name. Clara Whitman, 29, American, blind. His throat tightened. Grandfather, she's suitable. That's all you need to know. Ji-sung left the estate that night with questions he couldn't ask and a marriage he couldn't refuse. Thousands of miles away, Clara Whitman listened as her guardian delivered the same proposal and saw something no one expected: an escape. It's a new year, and while others scroll past stories like this, you stayed. That means you care, you feel. You don't want to miss moments that remind us we're alive. So subscribe, join this family, and tell me where you're watching from. Your presence matters more than you think today. The call came at 2:47 a.m. Han Ji-sung stood at the window of his office, Seoul's skyline bleeding neon into the glass. His phone had been silent for hours. When it finally rang, he already knew. The chairman collapsed during dinner. Secretary Park's voice carried the weight of rehearsed calm. The doctors say weeks, maybe less. Ji-sung closed his eyes. I'll be there within the hour. He ended the call without waiting for a response. Outside, the city pulsed with oblivious energy, nightclubs spilling music into streets, couples laughing beneath convenience store lights. None of it touched him. His grandfather was dying. The Han Group's future now balanced on a blade's edge. The hospital corridor smelled of antiseptic and old money. Ji-sung passed board members whispering in corners, their eyes tracking him with calculation he'd learned to recognize at 15. Uncle Myung-sok stood near the elevator, phone pressed to his ear, already positioning himself. Ji-sung ignored them all. Chairman Han looked smaller beneath the hospital sheets. Machines beeped their mechanical prayers around him. But his eyes, those remained sharp, cutting through the morphine haze. Sit, the old man commanded. Ji-sung obeyed. For several minutes, neither spoke. Ji-sung listened to the rhythm of the heart monitor, counting beats like a meditation. His grandfather had taught him that. Patience as weapon, silence as strategy. The board meets in 6 weeks, Chairman Han finally said. They want assurance, continuity, a pause. Family. Ji-sung's jaw tightened. I've given them 12 years of results. Results don't comfort frightened investors. His grandfather's hand trembled as he reached for a manila folder on the bedside table. Marry, produce the image they need, then they'll follow you anywhere. The folder landed in Ji-sung's lap. He opened it. A photograph. Professional. Recent. A woman with deep brown skin, natural hair twisted elegantly, eyes focused somewhere beyond the camera. Clara Whitman, 29, American. The next line stopped him. Visually impaired. Complete blindness since age 23. Ji-sung read it twice. 3 times. The words refused to rearrange themselves into something logical. I don't understand. You don't need to understand. You need to comply. Chairman Han's voice carried no cruelty, only the exhausted pragmatism of a man who had stopped explaining himself decades ago. She's suitable, connected to interests that benefit us. The arrangement is already in motion. She's blind. She's capable, more than most. A thin smile crossed the old man's lips. Don't insult her by assuming otherwise. Ji-sung stared at the photograph. Something uncomfortable stirred in his chest, not disgust, not pity, something worse, uncertainty. He didn't know how to exist around someone who experienced the world so differently. The admission shamed him. "When?" he asked quietly. 3 weeks. Secretary Park has the details." Ji-sung stood, folder in hand. At the door, his grandfather's voice caught him. "Ji-sung, this isn't punishment. It's preparation." He didn't turn around. "Yes, grandfather." 7,000 miles away, Clara Whitman sat in her Chicago apartment, fingers hovering over piano keys she could no longer see. The melody came anyway. It always did. Music had saved her twice. First at 17, when singing became the only language her fractured family understood. Then at 23, when autoimmune disease stole her sight in the span of 4 months and left her drowning in a darkness that had no edges. She'd rebuilt herself note by note. Vocal coaching, audio consultation, teaching performers to hear what audiences felt before they understood why. Her ears had become her eyes, sharper, more honest, unforgiving. The phone call from her legal guardian had come that morning. An arranged marriage, a Korean conglomerate, a man she'd never met offering a life she'd never imagined. Clara had listened carefully, asking precise questions, cataloging details. When her guardian finished, she'd requested 24 hours. She spent 12 of them at her piano. What convinced her wasn't the money. She'd never cared about wealth. It wasn't curiosity about Korea or rebellion against her circumstances. It was distance. Her brothers called daily, voices heavy with protective concern that felt like chains. Her mother visited weekly, rearranging Clara's apartment for safety without asking permission. Every relationship in her life had calcified into caretaking she'd never requested. Seoul meant anonymity, a country where no one would hover, no familiar voices deciding what she could handle. She called her guardian back. "I'll agree on one condition. My career stays mine, non-negotiable." The pause on the other end stretched too long. "I'll communicate that to the Han family." "Don't communicate it. Guarantee it." Another pause. "Understood." Clara ended the call and returned to her piano. Her fingers found a minor key, something unresolved, waiting. Their first meeting happened in a private room at the Han estate. Ji-sung arrived early, standing near the window, rehearsing nothing. When the door opened, he turned. Clara entered, guided by a staff member whose arm she held loosely. Assistance accepted, not dependency displayed. She wore navy blue, simple and precise. Her posture carried quiet authority. Ji-sung bowed, then caught himself. "I apologize. I'm bowing." "I assumed." Her voice was calm, almost amused. She extended her hand with practiced confidence. He shook it. Her grip was firm. They sat across from each other. Tea was poured. Neither drank. "I have questions," Clara said. "I'll answer honestly. Will I be expected to perform publicly as your wife?" "At necessary events, not frequently." "Will my work be restricted?" "No." "Will you interfere with my independence?" Ji-sung paused. "I have no intention of controlling you, Miss Whitman." She tilted her head slightly as though hearing something beneath his words. "Then we understand each other." The conversation lasted 18 minutes. Practical. Bloodless. Two people negotiating terms, not futures. When Clara stood to leave, she paused at the door. "Mr. Han, I don't expect affection, but I do expect honesty. You'll have it." She nodded once and disappeared into the hallway. Ji-sung remained seated, staring at his untouched tea. The wedding was beautiful. Photographers captured every angle. The designer hanbok, the elegant venue, the families assembled in careful arrangement. Ji-sung smiled when required. Clara's expression remained serene, unreadable. They exchanged vows written by someone else. At the reception, guests whispered about the American bride, the unexpected choice, the chairman's mysterious reasoning. Ji-sung heard fragments. "Bold move. Risky. She can't even see him." He said nothing. That night, they entered their new apartment together. The space was enormous. Modern architecture, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture selected by decorators who'd never met either occupant. Their footsteps echoed against polished floors. Clara paused in the living room, head tilted, listening, mapping the space through sound. "Your bedroom is down the left hallway," Ji-sung said. "Mine is opposite. The kitchen is straight ahead." "Thank you." Silence stretched between them. "Good night, Mrs. Han." "Good night, Mr. Han." They walked in opposite directions. Two strangers in a home neither had chosen, beginning a marriage neither wanted. Somewhere in the darkness, Clara counted her steps. Somewhere in his room, Ji-sung stared at the ceiling. The distance between them felt permanent. 3 weeks into their marriage, Han Ji-sung realized he didn't know his wife's morning routine. He left for work at 6:15 a.m. The apartment remained silent when he departed. No sounds from her wing, no evidence of movement. He returned after 10 p.m. most nights to find dinner containers in the refrigerator, neatly labeled in Braille stickers she'd brought from Chicago. They existed in parallel lines that never intersected. Ji-sung told himself this was ideal. Clean. Professional. Exactly what they'd agreed upon. But sometimes, passing her closed door, he paused, listening for something he couldn't name. Clara had memorized the apartment within 72 hours. 17 steps from her bedroom to the kitchen, 23 to the living room's center. The hallway leading to Ji-sung's wing carried a subtle draft, the ventilation system positioned differently on that side. She learned which floorboards whispered and which stayed silent. The refrigerator hummed at a frequency that helped her orient toward the kitchen from anywhere in the open space. The windows on the eastern wall caught morning sun that warmed specific patches of floor at predictable times. Sound was architecture, temperature was geography, texture was language. Her brothers had never understood this. They'd installed grab bars she didn't need, removed furniture she'd already mapped, hired assistants who spoke to her in slow, careful sentences as though blindness had damaged her comprehension. Here, no one rearranged her world without permission. The loneliness was preferable to the suffocation. The studio had been her one demand. Before signing the marriage contract, Clara had requested a soundproofed room equipped for professional audio work. The Han family's lawyers had balked at the expense. Clara had remained unmoved. Non-negotiable, she'd repeated until they stopped arguing. Now the studio occupied the apartment's northeastern corner, a perfect acoustic chamber with equipment she'd specified herself. Monitors she'd never see displayed waveforms she read through specialized software that converted visual data to tactile feedback on a refreshable Braille display. Her current project involved a young soprano struggling with emotional delivery. Clara had spent 3 hours that afternoon adjusting the singer's recorded tracks, isolating moments where technique overshadowed feeling. "You're hitting the note," Clara had told her during their video call. "But you're not living inside it. Music isn't performance, it's confession." The soprano had cried. Clara had waited. Then they'd started again. This was her purpose. Translating emotion into sound, teaching others to stop hiding behind precision. She worked until midnight most nights, headphones creating a world only she inhabited. She didn't know Ji-sung stood in the hallway, listening. He couldn't explain why he paused there. The studio's soundproofing should have contained everything, but sometimes during the quiet moments between tracks, fragments escaped. A piano chord, a vocal run, Clara's voice offering gentle corrections through the door. Ji-sung would stand motionless, briefcase still in hand, tie loosened from 12 hours of board meetings and strategic maneuvering. The music touched something he'd learned to bury. His mother had played piano before the divorce, before his father's public humiliation drove her back to Japan, before Ji-sung learned that vulnerability was a luxury the Han family couldn't afford. He never stayed long, just moments. Then he'd retreat to his wing, where silence felt safer. Thursday night, Clara's voice stopped him mid-step. "Do you always walk so quietly?" Ji-sung froze. The hallway stretched between them, her studio door open, her face turned toward the sound of his presence. "It's a habit," he managed. "Military training or family conditioning?" The observation cut closer than she could have known. "Both, probably." Clara nodded slowly. Her fingers rested on the braille display beside her, but her attention remained fixed on him, or rather, on the space his voice occupied. "You don't need to do that here," she said. "Walk quietly, I mean. I can hear you regardless. Might as well exist normally." She turned back to her work. The conversation apparently concluded. Ji-sung remained in the hallway longer than necessary, her words settling into places he didn't examine. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Seoul Contemporary Arts Collective wanted Clara Whitman Han to collaborate on an experimental performance piece, a fusion of live vocals, electronic manipulation, and spatial audio design. The project would premiere in 4 months at a venue that attracted significant media attention. Clara accepted within an hour. When Ji-sung learned about it through his assistant, who monitored public mentions of the Han family, he found her in the kitchen making tea with practiced efficiency. "The Arts Collective project," he began. "You should know it will attract attention." Clara's hands didn't pause. "I assumed." "The kind of attention that complicates things. Questions about our marriage, speculation about your condition. My blindness." "Yes." She poured hot water with steady precision, steam rising between them. "And you'd prefer I decline." "I'd prefer you understand the implications." Clara set the kettle down. When she spoke, her voice carried no anger, only clarity that felt sharper than rage. "Mr. Han, I agreed to this marriage. I agreed to occasional public appearances. I did not agree to disappear." She lifted her cup, turning toward her wing. "My work is not negotiable. That was established before I signed anything." She walked away, steps counted and certain. Ji-sung watched her go, argument dying unspoken. The pressure arrived from expected directions. Uncle Han Myung-sok had positioned himself as the stable alternative since Ji-sung's teenage years. Now, with Chairman Han hospitalized and the board vote approaching, Myung-sok's maneuvering intensified. Meetings that should have included Ji-sung were scheduled during his overseas calls. Reports reached the board before crossing his desk. Junior executives who'd once sought his mentorship now avoided eye contact in hallways. Small erosions, quiet sabotage, death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. Ji-sung absorbed it without complaint. Showing frustration meant showing weakness. The Han family had taught him that before he'd learned to read. He worked longer hours, slept less, ate meals at his desk that tasted like obligation. No one at the company asked if he was struggling. No one at home knew enough to ask. Friday night, 11:47 p.m. Ji-sung sat in the living room, laptop open, reviewing documents that blurred together. The apartment's silence pressed against him, comfortable once, now somehow accusatory. Footsteps approached. Clara's rhythm, measured and familiar now. She paused at the kitchen entrance. "You're still working." "The board meeting is in 3 weeks. You've been working past midnight every night this week." He looked up, surprised she'd noticed. Surprised she'd tracked his patterns the way she tracked everything else. "There's a lot to prepare." Clara moved to the kitchen, preparing tea without asking if he wanted any. She made 2 cups, set one on the counter near enough for him to reach. Then she sat in the chair across from him, waiting. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, expectant. Ji-sung found himself talking. He didn't explain everything, couldn't without revealing weaknesses the Han family had trained him to hide, but fragments emerged. The board's resistance, his uncle's positioning, the feeling of fighting battles alone while pretending everything remained controlled. Clara listened. She didn't interrupt with solutions, didn't offer platitudes about perseverance or faith. Just listened. Her attention was complete, focused, present in a way he rarely experienced. When he finished, silence returned, but different now. Shared. "You sound like someone who doesn't ask for help," Clara said finally. Ji-sung's throat tightened. Asking implies weakness. Asking implies trust. She stood, taking her empty cup. "Those aren't the same thing, Mr. Han." She left him alone with her words. That night, Ji-sung couldn't sleep. He lay in darkness, replaying the conversation, her observations, her patience, the way she'd heard things he hadn't said. His entire life, he'd been surrounded by people who wanted something: position, access, advantage. Every relationship carried transaction beneath its surface. Clara wanted nothing from him. She'd agreed to this marriage for distance, not connection. Her career remained her priority. Their arrangement was exactly what they'd negotiated: clean, professional, temporary. Yet she'd noticed his exhaustion, made him tea, listened without agenda. She understood him more than colleagues he'd worked beside for a decade, more than family members who shared his blood and name. The realization unsettled him deeply. Ji-sung stared at the ceiling until dawn lightened the windows. Somewhere across the apartment, Clara slept peacefully, unaware that everything between them had shifted. Or perhaps, knowing her, she'd already heard the change. The pre-board gathering occupied the Han Group's private reception hall, a space designed to intimidate through understatement. Mahogany panels absorbed light, crystal chandeliers hung like frozen accusations. Every surface whispered old money and older power. Ji-sung arrived early, as always. His suit cost more than most employees earned monthly. His expression revealed nothing. Tonight would determine everything. The formal board vote was scheduled for next week, but these gatherings held the real weight. Alliances formed in whispered conversations. Loyalties shifted over champagne and careful laughter. By the time votes were officially cast, outcomes had already been decided in rooms like this. His uncle stood near the bar, surrounded by directors who'd once reported to Ji-sung. Their body language told the story. Leaning toward Myung-sok, away from the nephew they'd spent years pretending to respect. Ji-sung noted each face, filed each betrayal. Then the room's attention shifted. Clara entered on the arm of Secretary Park, who'd been assigned to escort her. She wore black, simple, elegant, devastating. Her natural hair was styled in an updo that added height and gravity. Dark sunglasses covered her eyes, not to hide her blindness, but to control how others perceived it. She looked like someone who belonged. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Ji-sung caught fragments. The American wife. Can she even... Bold choice, bringing her here. He moved toward her instinctively, then stopped himself. They hadn't discussed her attendance. She'd simply informed him that morning, her tone brooking no argument. "I should be present," she'd said. "Absence invites speculation." He'd wanted to argue. Instead, he'd nodded and left for work. Now she stood in enemy territory, surrounded by people who saw her as weakness incarnate, a foreign, disabled woman attached to a man they wanted to destroy. Clara's expression remained serene. She couldn't see the predators circling, but Ji-sung suspected she heard them perfectly. The gathering proceeded through its rituals: cocktails, small talk, strategic positioning. Ji-sung made his rounds, shaking hands that gripped too briefly, accepting congratulations that carried no warmth. His uncle shadowed him at careful distances, always visible, always smiling. Clara remained near the windows, Secretary Park hovering nervously beside her. Several directors approached, curiosity disguised as courtesy. She answered their questions with practiced grace, revealing nothing, conceding nothing. Ji-sung watched from across the room, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Pride, perhaps, or concern. He couldn't tell anymore. The attack came during the informal remarks. Director Yoon, a board member who'd aligned with Myung-seok months ago, raised his glass for attention. The room quieted. To the Han Group's continued prosperity, he began, his smile carrying poison, and to the wisdom of choosing leadership that reflects our values, stability, tradition, Korean excellence. The emphasis landed like a slap. Ji-sung's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Uncle Myung-seok stepped forward, accepting the implicit endorsement with false humility. I'm grateful for the confidence many of you have expressed privately. These are uncertain times. The board deserves leadership without complications. His gaze drifted toward Clara. The room understood. My nephew has served admirably, Myung-seok continued, voice dripping with condescension. But perhaps the pressures of recent months have affected his judgment. Certain personal decisions suggest a young man still learning the weight of this family's legacy. Silence pressed against the walls. Ji-sung felt heat rising in his chest, anger he'd spent decades learning to suppress. His uncle was publicly questioning his competence, using his marriage as evidence of unfitness. He should respond, defend himself, fight, but Han family training held firm, never react emotionally, never give opponents satisfaction. He remained silent. Clara's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Mr. Han Myung-seok. The room turned. She stood exactly where she'd been, posture unchanged, expression calm. But something in her voice commanded attention in ways presence alone couldn't achieve. You mentioned complications, she continued. I assume you're referring to me. Myung-seok's smile faltered. Mrs. Han, this is a business discussion. Then let's discuss business. She stepped forward, Secretary Park scrambling to keep pace. Her movement carried no hesitation, no uncertainty. Each step measured, each word deliberate. My name is Clara Whitman Han. Before our marriage, I served as legal representative for the Whitman Family Trust, a private investment vehicle established by my grandfather 43 years ago. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The trust holds minority positions in several international logistics companies. Clara paused, letting the silence build. Including a 17% stake in Han Global Shipping, acquired during the 1997 financial crisis when your family needed foreign capital to survive. The room stopped breathing. Ji-sung stared at his wife, mind racing. He'd reviewed her background before the marriage, or thought he had. Nothing in her file mentioned investment holdings. Nothing suggested financial significance beyond her career. For 26 years, the trust remained passive, Clara continued. Voting rights were delegated to the Han Group's board under a revocable agreement signed by my grandfather and Chairman Han. She turned toward the gathering, addressing everyone and no one. That delegation expires in 11 days, after which voting rights return to the trust's representative. A pause. To me. Director Yoon's champagne glass trembled. 17% may seem modest, Clara said, but combined with the shares Chairman Han has already designated for his grandson's inheritance, it creates a controlling interest, one that cannot be challenged by board politics or family maneuvering. She faced Myung-seok directly, or rather, faced the space his voice had occupied. You questioned my husband's judgment. I question your mathematics. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. The gathering dissolved within 30 minutes. Directors who'd aligned with Myung-seok suddenly remembered prior commitments. Handshakes that had bypassed Ji-sung now sought his attention. His uncle left without speaking to anyone, face carrying the particular grayness of a man watching his ambitions collapse. Ji-sung moved through the aftermath mechanically, accepting reversed loyalties with expressions that revealed nothing. Inside, everything burned. The car ride home passed in silence. Clara sat beside him, hands folded in her lap, face turned toward the window she couldn't see. Seoul's lights flickered across her features, beautiful, distant, unknowable. Ji-sung's mind replayed the evening obsessively. Every word she'd spoken, every detail she'd hidden. The woman he'd married wasn't who he'd believed. Their apartment felt different now, larger, colder. Ji-sung waited until they'd removed their coats, until the door closed behind them, until silence became unbearable. "Why didn't you tell me?" Clara paused mid-step. Her expression remained neutral. "Tell you what, specifically? The trust, the shares, the fact that you held power over this family before we ever met." His voice carried edges he couldn't soften. "You let me walk into that room unprepared. Let me believe I was fighting alone." "You were fighting alone. That was your choice." "My choice?" She turned toward him fully. Without her sunglasses, removed in the car, her eyes held their usual stillness, but something beneath flickered. "You never asked about my background beyond what your lawyers provided. Never inquired about my family's history, my grandfather's connections, the reasons Chairman Han specifically chose me." Her voice remained calm. "You assumed I was a strategic inconvenience, a condition to be tolerated, so I let you believe that." Ji-sung's throat tightened. "You could have saved you." The word landed like an accusation. "You didn't need saving, Ji-sung. You needed someone standing with you. There's a difference." The use of his given name startled him. She'd never called him anything but Mr. Han. "I watched you absorb your uncle's attacks for weeks," she continued. "Watched you carry pressure alone because asking for help felt like weakness. I couldn't make you trust me, but I could wait until trust mattered." Silence stretched between them. "Why reveal it tonight?" he asked finally. "Because tonight he tried to destroy you publicly, using me as the weapon." Something hardened in her expression. "I don't allow myself to be used against people I've chosen to stand beside." The words carried weight Ji-sung couldn't fully process. She'd chosen to stand beside him, not because of the marriage contract, not because of family obligation, because of something else entirely. The board vote occurred 6 days later. Ji-sung was confirmed as successor by unanimous decision. The 17% voting rights Clara controlled had made opposition mathematically futile. Directors who'd whispered against him now praised his vision, his stability, his excellent judgment in marriage. Uncle Myung-sok resigned from his executive position, citing health concerns. No one believed him. No one protested. The Han Group's future was secured. That evening, Ji-sung found Clara in her studio. She sat at the piano, fingers resting on keys without pressing them. The soundproofing contained whatever music lived inside her silence. "It's done," he said from the doorway. "Officially confirmed." She nodded slowly. "Congratulations." "Thank you. For everything." The words felt inadequate. He wanted to say more, to acknowledge what her intervention meant, what her patience had cost her, why her presence had changed something fundamental in how he understood his own life. But the distance between them felt wider than ever. She'd revealed herself to save him. And in doing so, she'd exposed how little he'd truly known her. The victory felt hollow. Clara returned to her piano, fingers finally pressing keys. A melody emerged, something minor, unresolved, aching. Ji-sung watched from the doorway, closer than ever and further than before. The family dinner was at 7. Ji-sung's mother had sent 3 reminder texts. He turned his phone face down on the passenger seat and drove in the opposite direction. Clara's performance started at 8. She hadn't invited him. She'd mentioned it once, casually, the way you mention weather. But he'd written it down in his phone. Thursday, 8 p.m., Steinway Theater. Like it mattered. Because it did. The theater was smaller than he expected. Not the grand concert hall he'd imagined, but an intimate black box with mismatched chairs and exposed lighting rigs. He slipped into the back row as the lights dimmed. The program listed 5 collaborative pieces. Clara's was third, a string quartet arrangement of something modern he didn't recognize. She sat second violin, her posture precise, her bow hand steady. Ji-sung leaned forward. He'd never watched her perform before. Not like this. Not where her entire body became an instrument of focus, where every micro-movement had intention. He couldn't hear the music the way others did, but he could see it. In the synchronized breathing of the quartet, in the way Clara's eyes closed during a passage, then snapped open to meet the cellist's gaze, in the precise moment her bow lifted, held suspended, before the final note. The audience applauded. Ji-sung felt the vibration through his seat. He found her backstage, half hidden behind the equipment case, carefully loosening her bow. She startled when she saw him. "You came. How was it?" The question came out rougher than intended. Clara set down her violin. "You tell me." Ji-sung hesitated. He'd prepared nothing. No careful phrases or practiced observations. "The second movement," he said slowly. "When you came in after the viola, you were late, just slightly, on purpose." Her eyebrows lifted. "It created this?" He gestured uselessly. "This tension, like the music was pulling against itself. And then when you finally synchronized in the third movement, it felt like—" He stopped, suddenly self-conscious. "Like what?" "Like relief," he finished quietly. "Like coming home." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression, something fragile and unguarded. "I wish I could see it," she said. "The way you do?" The words hung between them. "I can describe it any time you want," Ji-sung said. She smiled, small and real. "I might hold you to that." They drove home separately, but arrived at the apartment within minutes of each other. Clara was unlocking the door when Ji-sung pulled into his designated spot. Inside, the silence felt different. Not empty, expectant. Clara set her violin case by the door and moved to the kitchen. Ji-sung followed, stopping in the doorway. She filled the kettle, her movements precise and familiar. The routine they'd built without discussing. "Clara!" She turned. Ji-sung's hands were shaking. He shoved them in his pockets. "I don't want this to be empty anymore." The kettle began to hiss. "This marriage," he continued, forcing the words out. "I know why we started it. I know what it was supposed to be, but He stopped, started again. "I don't want to keep pretending it's still just an arrangement." Clara turned off the stove. The sudden silence was deafening. "What are you saying?" Her voice was carefully neutral. "I'm saying I married you because it was practical, because it solved problems." Ji-sung stepped into the kitchen. "But I'd marry you again, right now, for completely different reasons." Clara's hand tightened on the kettle handle. "Ji-sung—" "You don't have to say anything," he interrupted. "I just needed you to know. I needed to stop being afraid of—" "Of what?" The question was barely a whisper. "Of you realizing you don't need this. That you stayed because I needed you. Not because you wanted to." Clara set down the kettle with a sharp click. For a terrible moment, Ji-sung thought she might leave. Just walk away. Back to her room. Close the door on whatever this was becoming. Instead, she turned to face him fully. "You think I stayed out of obligation?" Her voice trembled. "You think I learned your tells, memorized your schedule, rearranged my entire life because I felt needed?" Ji-sung couldn't speak. "I stayed because—" Clara's breath hitched. "Because somewhere between the convenience and the contracts, I stopped being able to imagine my life without you in it. And that terrified me." "Why?" "Because what if you never felt the same? What if I was just—" She gestured helplessly. Just useful? A good companion? Someone who made your life easier? Jisung crossed the distance between them in 2 steps. You make my life impossible, he said. You make me want things I didn't know I was allowed to want. You make me brave enough to ask for them. Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I love you, Jisung said. Simple. True. Not because you're convenient. Not because you understand my needs. I love you because you're you and I choose you. Every day. I choose you. The first tear fell. Clara reached up, her palm finding his cheek. I choose you too, she whispered. I've been choosing you for months. I was just too afraid to say it. Jisung pulled her close. She came willingly, her face pressing into his shoulder, her hands gripping his shirt like an anchor. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, the forgotten kettle cooling on the stove. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. But inside their small apartment, something had shifted. The marriage they'd entered out of practicality had become something else entirely. Something chosen, something real. Not because they had to. Because they wanted to. Because they loved each other. And that made all the difference. Thank you for staying till the end. Most people click away, but you didn't. And that means something. Don't disappear now. Subscribe, stay close this year, and keep walking with us through these stories. Comment, share, and tell me where you're watching from. Your voice matters more than you know today.